The silence in the living room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and tasted of stale cigarette smoke and impending ruin. I stood in the corner, deep in the shadows cast by the singular flickering lamp that my father hadn't bothered to change in 3 months. I wasn't hiding exactly. I was observing. It was a habit I had picked up during my years studying art history and appraisal. The ability to stand back, look at a composition, and find the crack in the varnish, the fake signature, the flaw that devalued the entire piece. Tonight, the flaw was sitting on the stained beige sofa, wringing his hands until the knuckles turned white. My father, Thomas Evans. The front door had not been kicked in. There were no shouts, no breaking glass. The arrival of Anthony Ravellini was far more terrifying than any Hollywood dramatization of a mob hit. He had simply walked in. The lock on our front door hadn't even clicked. It had yielded to his security team as if it knew better than to resist. Now, Anthony Ravellini sat in my father's armchair, the only piece of furniture that wasn't falling apart. He looked out of place. His suit was dark charcoal, tailored to a precision that made the peeling wallpaper of our living room look even more pathetic. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, except for the air around him. It was cold, pressurized. He had dark hair kept short and professional, and his eyes were a dark brown that absorbed the dim light rather than reflecting it. There were no scars on his face, no broken nose, nothing to suggest he did the dirty work himself. That was what made him dangerous. He didn't have to. 2 men stood by the door. Statues. They hadn't blinked since they entered. "Thomas," Ravellini said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and devoid of anger. It was the voice of a man discussing the weather. Not a debt that could end a life. We are past the point of negotiation. The deadline was noon. My father made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a sleeve that was already stained. I know, Mr. Ravellini. Please. It's the horses, the track. It was a sure thing. I just need another week. 2 days. Give me 2 days and I can turn it around. I watched Ravellini's hand. He tapped his index finger once on the armrest. That was the only sign of irritation. You have had 3 months extensions. You have borrowed from the loan sharks to pay the interest on the principal you owe me. You are drowning, Thomas, and I am not a lifeguard. I shifted my weight slightly. The floorboard beneath me creaked. Ravellini's head snapped toward my corner. It was a predatory movement, sharp and precise. For a second, I thought he was going to pull a weapon, but he just narrowed those dark eyes. I held my breath. I had hoped to remain a ghost in this transaction, a witness to the inevitable end of my father's chaotic life. I had my bag packed upstairs. I had $200 hidden in my shoe. I was ready to leave the moment the violence started. But Ravellini saw me. He didn't look away. He scanned me from my worn sneakers to the oversized gray sweater I wore to keep warm in a house where the heating had been cut off weeks ago. He didn't look at me with lust. He looked at me the way I looked at a vase at an estate sale, checking for provenance, durability, and value. Who is that? Ravellini asked, not taking his eyes off me. My father turned, seeming to remember for the first time that I existed. That? That's just Lucia, my daughter. She lives here? Yes. She helps around. She's a good girl. My father's voice took on a frantic, desperate pitch. I saw the gears turning in his addict brain. He was looking for an angle, a lifeline, anything to stop the bullet he was sure was coming. Ravellini looked back at my father. You owe me $400,000, Thomas. You have no assets. This house is mortgaged to the hilt and rotting from the inside out. Your car has been repossessed. You have nothing. I have... My father looked around the room wildly. His eyes landed on the television, then the broken stereo, and then, inevitably, they landed back on me. A cold pit opened in my stomach. I knew that look. It was the same look he gave his wedding ring before he pawned it. It was the look of a man who had stripped away every layer of morality to feed the beast of his addiction. I have no money, Father cried out, his voice cracking. He scrambled off the sofa, falling to his knees. It was a humiliating display. I have no money, Mr. Ravellini. But look at her. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Lucia. She's young. She's smart. College educated. She can work. She can be whatever you need. My father crawled 2 inches closer to the immaculate shoes of the Mafia boss. She'll serve as payment. Take her. Take her and wipe the slate clean. Please. The silence that followed was absolute. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. Perhaps I had always known it would end this way. Thomas Evans had sold my mother's jewelry, my college fund, and his own dignity. Selling me was just the final liquidation of his inventory. Ravellini didn't speak immediately. He turned his head slowly back to me. He stood up. He was tall, over 6 feet, filling the cramped room with an overwhelming masculine presence. He walked toward me, crossing the stained carpet. I didn't back away. I refused to cower. If I was to be sold like cattle, I would at least stand like a human being. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and cold winter air. "How old are you?" he asked. 23, I answered. My voice was steady. "Good. Did you know about the debt?" "I manage his mail," I said coldly. "I know about the 400,000 to you. I know about the 50,000 to the bank. I know about the 3 liens on the house." He raised an eyebrow. "And yet you stayed. I had nowhere else to go." Yet. Ravellini studied my face. He seemed to be looking for fear, tears, or hysteria. He found none. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face. I didn't flinch, though every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. He took a strand of my dark blonde hair between his fingers, examining the texture, then let it drop. He turned back to my father, who was still on his knees, panting like a dog waiting for a scrap. "A debt of 400,000 is a heavy price for one person," Ravellini said deeply. "She's worth it," Father babbled. "She cooks, she cleans, she's obedient." I almost laughed. I was none of those things. I was a survivor. Ravellini looked at me again. "Are you obedient, Lucia?" "I am pragmatic," I corrected him. "I understand leverage, and I understand contracts." A flicker of amusement passed through his dark eyes. It was gone as quickly as it came. He turned to his guards. "Bring the car around." Then he looked down at my father. "Get up, Thomas. You look pathetic." My father scrambled to his feet, a smile of relief breaking through the sweat on his face. "So, we have a deal? The debt is gone?" "The debt is transferred," Ravellini corrected. "You are free of your obligation to me. But you are also free of your daughter. If you ever try to contact her, if you ever come near her, if I see your face in my city again, the debt returns, with interest. And you will pay it in blood. Do you understand?" "Yes, yes, of course. Take her." My father didn't even look at me. He was already mentally spending the money he wasn't going to lose. Ravellini turned to me. "Pack a bag. You have 5 minutes. Essentials only." I didn't wait to be told twice. I turned on my heel and walked out of the living room, past the man who had raised me, and up the creaking stairs. I didn't run. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me rush. My bedroom was a small box at the top of the stairs. It was cold. I grabbed my battered duffel bag from under the bed. I didn't pack clothes for a new life. I packed for survival. Jeans, thick sweaters, my comfortable boots. I went to the loose floorboard in the closet and pulled out my small stash of cash, $212. I shoved it into my pocket. Then I went to my desk. I picked up the only thing of real value I owned, my jeweler's loupe and a small leather-bound book on 19th century European art signatures. It was my passion. My career before my father's debts had forced me to drop out of the master's program to keep the lights on. I wrapped the loupe in a sock and tucked it deep into the bag. I looked around the room. There were no posters, no memories I wanted to keep. This house had been a prison of anxiety for years. Every phone ring made me jump. Every knock at the door made me sick. Leaving it didn't feel like being captured. It felt like being cut loose from an anchor that was dragging me to the bottom of the ocean. I zipped the bag. It was light. My entire life weighed less than 20 pounds. When I came back downstairs, Ravellini was checking his watch. A Patek Philippe, genuine, platinum casing. I filed that information away automatically. 4 minutes, he noted. Efficient. I don't have much to mourn, I said. My father was standing by the window, peeking out at the street, probably making sure the neighbors weren't watching. He turned as we headed for the door. Lucia, he said, trying to summon some fatherly tone. You be good for Mr. Ravellini. You do what he says. It's for the best. You understand, right? I did this for us. I stopped. I was 3 feet from the door. I turned to look at Thomas Evans one last time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw his eyes out for trading me like a used car. But anger required energy, and I needed every ounce of energy for what was coming next. You did this for yourself, I said, my voice dead of all emotion. Don't pretend this is a sacrifice, Thomas. You sold me to save your kneecaps. Now, honey, don't. I cut him off. The debt is paid. You have your life. I have mine. If I were you, I'd stop gambling. Next time, you won't have a daughter to barter with. I walked out the door into the biting cold of the night without waiting for his response. The air outside was crisp, hurting my lungs in a good way. A massive black SUV was idling at the curb. It wasn't just a car. It was a tank disguised as luxury. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like black holes. One of the guards opened the back door for me. I climbed in. The interior was a shock to the system. Cream leather, soft ambient lighting, and warmth that seeped into my bones immediately. It smelled of new leather and safety. Ravellini slid in beside me. The door closed with a heavy thud, sealing out the noise of the street, the wind, and my past. The lock engaged with a decisive click. As the car pulled away, merging smoothly into the traffic, the silence stretched between us. I kept my bag on my lap, hugging it against my chest like a shield. I looked out the window, watching the neighborhood I had grown up in blur into streaks of light. We were leaving the slums and heading toward the city skyline that glowed in the distance like a promised land. We need to establish the ground rules, Ravellini said. He didn't look at me. He was scrolling through something on a tablet that he had pulled from the seat pocket. I assume I don't get a vote, I said. You assume correctly. He locked the tablet screen and placed it down. He turned his body slightly toward me, dominating the space. You are not a guest, Lucia, but you are not a slave. I have no interest in forced labor, and I have even less interest in unwilling women. I exhaled, a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Then what am I? You are collateral, he said simply. For the next 5 years, you belong to the Ravellini family. You will live in my home. You will be available when I require your presence. You will not leave the premises without an escort. You will not contact anyone from your previous life. You will disappear. Available for what? I asked, my grip tightening on my bag. Appearances, he said. Events, dinners. My world is built on perception. A man of my standing requires a certain domestic image to close specific deals. You are articulate. You are presentable. And according to your father, you are educated. You will play the role of my companion. And if I refuse, you won't, he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Because you are smart. You saw the alternative back there. You know that living in a golden cage is preferable to drowning in a sewer. Your father would have sold you to someone far worse than me eventually. A pimp, a drug dealer, another bookie. With me, you will have food, clothes, safety, and luxury. All I ask in return is your time and your loyalty. 5 years, I repeated. 5 years. Then the contract is fulfilled, and you are free to go with a severance package that will let you start over anywhere in the world. It sounded like a business deal. Cold, transactional, logical. It was exactly the kind of language I understood. I have conditions, I said. One of the guards in the front seat shifted, likely surprised that the payment was speaking back. Ravellini just looked amused. You are in no position to negotiate, Lucia. I'm not negotiating the terms of my surrender, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm clarifying the job description. You said you have no interest in unwilling women. Does that mean my bed is my own? Ravellini's gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second, then returned to my eyes. I do not rape, Lucia. I don't need to. If you are in my bed, it will be because you walked there yourself. Then I won't be in your bed, I said sharply. We shall see, he murmured, turning back to his tablet. But yes, your room is your sanctuary. As long as you respect my house, you will be safe within it. But understand this. Outside of those walls, you are a target. You are now associated with me. My enemies are your enemies. If you try to run, I won't have to hunt you down. Someone else will find you first, and they will use you to get to me. And they will not be as polite as I am. The reality of his words settled over me. I wasn't just a prisoner. I was a piece on a chessboard. I won't run, I said. I have nothing to run back to. Good. The car slowed down as we approached the city center. The buildings grew taller, blocking out the stars. We were entering his world now. The world of steel, glass, and blood. I looked at the profile of the man who now owned the next 5 years of my life. He was terrifying, yes. But looking at the clean line of his jaw and the calm intelligence in his eyes, I realized something strange. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't wondering where my next meal was coming from. I wasn't wondering if the electricity would be cut off. The fear of the unknown was there, but the fear of poverty, the grinding, humiliating fear that had defined my existence, was gone. My father had sold me to save himself. But as the skyline glittered ahead of us, I wondered if, inadvertently, he had saved me too. One more thing, Ravellini said, interrupting my thoughts. Yes? Your last name, Evans. You don't use it anymore. In my house, you are simply Lucia. We don't advertise where you came from. Fine, I said. Lucia. Just Lucia. He nodded, satisfied. The car turned into the underground entrance of a massive skyscraper. The gates opened automatically, swallowing us into the belly of the building. Welcome home, Lucia, Anthony Ravellini said. As the darkness of the garage enveloped the car, I realized the irony. I had lost my freedom, but I had gained a future. It was a dangerous, twisted future, but it was mine to navigate. I loosened my grip on the duffel bag. My hands were steady. The game had begun. The elevator ride to the penthouse took exactly 45 seconds. I counted them, watching the digital numbers climb higher and higher, leaving the grid of the street level far below. With every floor that passed, the air pressure changed slightly. A physical reminder that I was ascending into a stratosphere I had no business occupying. Anthony Ravellini stood beside me, silent and still. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone. He simply existed in the space, consuming the oxygen, radiating a kind of calm authority that was more terrifying than any shout. When the doors slid open with a soft chime, I stepped into a world that felt less like a home and more like a fortress of solitude carved from glass and steel. The entryway was vast, paved in dark marble that reflected the recessed lighting like a black frozen lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. A view that people killed for. But what struck me wasn't the opulence. It was the silence. My father's house had always been filled with noise. The hum of the refrigerator that was dying, the rattle of the pipes, the muttering of a man losing his mind to addiction. Here, the silence was heavy, expensive, and absolute. Coat, Ravellini said. It wasn't a question. I slipped off my worn denim jacket. He took it from me, not handing it to a servant, but hanging it himself in a closet that looked larger than my bathroom. The gesture was strangely domestic for a man who commanded an army of criminals. Follow me. I walked behind him, my boots making dull thuds against the marble while his dress shoes were virtually silent. We passed a living area with a sofa that looked like a modern art installation, a kitchen that gleamed with stainless steel surfaces that had clearly never seen a burnt toast, and a hallway lined with black and white photography. He stopped at a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. He pushed it open and gestured for me to enter. This is your room, he said. I stepped inside and felt my breath hitch. It was beautiful, yes, in a stark, masculine way. The walls were a deep charcoal. The bed was a king-sized expanse of white linen, and there was an ensuite bathroom visible through a frosted glass door. But what drew my eye wasn't the luxury. It was the lock on the door. A heavy brass deadbolt. On the inside, I turned to look at him, surprised. "You can lock it," he said, reading my mind with unnerving accuracy. "Privacy is a luxury you probably haven't had in a long time. Here, it is a standard." "You trust me behind a locked door?" I asked, gripping the strap of my duffel bag. "I have the master key, Lucia. But I won't use it unless I have reason to believe you are harming yourself or planning something stupid. As I told you in the car, I do not force entry. If that door is locked, I will knock." He stepped back into the hallway, creating a physical boundary between us. "The kitchen is fully stocked. Eat whatever you want. The library and the gym are open to you. My office," he pointed to a set of double doors at the opposite end of the hall, "is not locked, but I advise you to knock before entering. I handle business there that you do not want to overhear." "And if I want to leave?" I asked, testing the perimeter. "The elevator requires a biometric scan or a code. You have neither. The fire escape is alarmed and monitored by a security team in the lobby. If you trigger it, 3 men with very little patience will be up here in 90 seconds. Don't test them." His eyes were dark, serious, devoid of cruelty but full of warning. "Sleep," he ordered. "Tomorrow we will discuss your schedule. I have a tailor coming at 10 to measure you." "A tailor? You represent the Ravellini family now. Your current wardrobe is—" He glanced at my jeans, which had a patch on the knee. "Insufficient." With that, he turned and walked away. I watched him disappear into the shadows of the living room, then I closed the door. I turned the lock. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I had heard all night. I didn't unpack immediately. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking perfectly under my weight, supporting me in a way I wasn't used to. I looked around the room. It was warm. The thermostat on the wall read 72 degrees. For the first time in 3 winters, I didn't have to sleep in 2 hoodies. I went into the bathroom. The shower was a waterfall style, enclosed in glass. I turned the handle, and hot water, instantly hot, not lukewarm after 10 minutes of running, poured out. I stripped off my clothes, the layers of grime and stress from the confrontation at my father's house peeling away. I stood under the spray for a long time, watching the steam rise. I should have been crying. I should have been terrified. I was a prisoner in a high-rise tower, owned by a mob boss. But as the hot water hit my skin, all I felt was a profound, exhaustion-fueled relief. The debt collectors weren't coming here. The phone wasn't going to ring with threats. For the next 5 years, I was a bird in a cage. Yes. But the cage was bulletproof, and the hawk guarding it was the most dangerous predator in the sky. I dried off with a towel that was thicker than my winter coat and climbed into the bed. I thought I would lie awake for hours, plotting my escape or analyzing my fate. But the moment my head hit the pillow, my body shut down. It recognized safety, even if my mind hadn't accepted it yet. I slept dreamlessly, a deep, comatose slumber that belonged to the dead or the saved. I woke up to light streaming through the blackout curtains I had failed to close completely. The clock on the bedside table read 8:30 a.m. Panic flared for a microsecond. I was late for work, late for the shift at the antique shop that paid me under the table. Before reality crashed back in, I didn't have a job anymore. I had a role. I dressed in the cleanest clothes I had left, black leggings and a gray oversized sweater. I brushed my hair, pulling it back into a severe bun. I looked in the mirror. My hazel eyes looked clearer than they had in months. The dark circles were still there, but they were lighter. I unlocked my door and stepped out into the penthouse. It was silent. "Mr. Ravellini?" I called out softly. No answer. I walked to the kitchen. There was a pot of coffee on the counter, still hot, with a note beside it written in sharp, angular handwriting. "I am in meetings until noon. Eat." I poured a cup. It was black, strong, and tasted like beans that were ground 10 seconds ago. I opened the fridge. It was absurd. Rows of organic produce, imported cheeses, sparkling water, steaks. I grabbed an apple and a piece of cheddar, eating standing up, leaning against the marble island. I was bored. My entire life for the last 5 years had been a hustle, survival. Every minute was accounted for. Working, studying, hiding, managing my father. Now, I had nothing. Time stretched out before me like a vast, empty desert. I explored. The living room had books, but they were mostly architectural digests or business biographies. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. From up here, the people looked like ants. I wondered if my father was down there, already placing bets with the money he didn't have to pay Ravellini anymore. The thought made my stomach turn, so I pushed it away. I found myself drawn to the double doors at the end of the hall. The office. He had said it wasn't locked. He had advised me to knock. But he also said he was in meetings until noon, which implied he wasn't in there right now. My curiosity was a physical itch. I needed to know who this man was. Was he a brute with money, or something else? I turned the handle. It opened silently. The office was magnificent. It smelled of old paper, leather, and cigar smoke. One wall was entirely glass overlooking the harbor. The other walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, legal texts, history, philosophy, not decoration. These books looked red. The spines were cracked. Some had bookmarks sticking out. But what stopped me dead in my tracks was the painting hanging behind the massive ebony desk. I walked toward it, my coffee forgotten on a side table. It was a landscape, oil on canvas. Pastoral scene, mid-18th century style. A group of shepherdesses by a stream. Ruined classical architecture in the background, bathed in a golden, hazy light. It was framed in an ornate, gilded frame that screamed museum quality. I narrowed my eyes. I reached into my pocket. I had transferred my jeweler's loop from my bag to my sweater this morning out of habit. It was my security blanket. I brought it to my eye and leaned in close, dangerously close to the canvas. I studied the brushwork on the foliage in the lower left quadrant. I examined the crackler, the network of fine cracks that appear in old varnish. It's wrong, I whispered to myself. The technique was good, exceptional even. It mimicked the layering of the French Rococo masters perfectly. But the blue pigment in the shepherdess's skirt, it was too vibrant, too stable. In a painting of this age, the lapis lazuli would have degraded slightly, or the binding medium would have yellowed it to a distinct greenish hue. This blue was punching me in the face, and the signature in the corner. I was so absorbed in the analysis, tracing the flow of the brush strokes with my gaze, that I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear the footsteps on the thick Persian rug. I thought I told you to knock. The voice was low, vibrating through the room like a bass note. I froze. I didn't jump, but my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I straightened up slowly, turning to face him. Anthony Ravellini stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle and dusted with dark hair. He looked less like a CEO now and more like a man who had been strangling problems all morning. He didn't look angry. He looked assessing. He walked toward me, closing the distance until he was standing behind his desk, and I was standing in front of it, like a naughty schoolgirl called to the principal's office. "I apologize," I said, keeping my voice steady. The door was open. I was curious. Curiosity killed the cat, Lucia, but satisfaction brought it back. I countered instinctively. His eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the painting, then back at me. He noticed the jeweler's loop clutched in my hand. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Searching for a safe behind the canvas?" "No, I was looking at the pigment." "The pigment?" He crossed his arms over his chest. The biceps strained against the white fabric. "And what did the pigment tell you?" I hesitated. This was a man who prided himself on control, on perfection. Telling him he had been duped might not be the smartest survival strategy, but lying to him felt more dangerous. He was a man who smelled deceit. "It told me that you overpaid," I said. The silence that followed was thick. Anthony didn't blink. "Explain." I took a breath and stepped back toward the painting, pointing with the hand that held the loop. "This is supposed to be a Fragonard, correct? Or at least a rigorous imitation from his workshop. It was sold to me as a Fragonard." authenticated by 2 experts in London. Your experts are either incompetent or on the payroll of the seller, I said. Look here. I pointed to the blue skirt of the central figure. The blue is consistent with synthetic ultramarine. That wasn't invented until 1826. Fragonard died in 1806. Unless he was a time traveler, he didn't paint this. Anthony walked around the desk. He came to stand right beside me. He was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking where I pointed. Go on, he said softly. The crackler. I continued, my professional confidence overriding my fear. See this pattern? It's uniform. Too uniform. Natural aging cracks are random, influenced by the wooden stretcher bars and humidity changes. These cracks look like they were induced by baking the canvas or using a chemical crackle varnish. And the brushwork here. I hovered my finger over the trees. It's too hesitant. The master painted with speed, with confidence. This artist was copying. They were careful. You can see where they lifted the brush to check their work against the original. I lowered my hand and looked up at him. He was staring at the painting with a look of intense concentration. It's a fake, I concluded. A very expensive, very beautiful fake. Probably late 19th century. Worth maybe $10,000 as a decorative piece. Not the $2 million you likely paid for it. Anthony turned his head slowly to look at me. His dark eyes drilled into mine, stripping away my defenses. I expected anger. I expected him to yell at me for insulting his possession. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that just realized the rabbit has teeth. You studied art? He asked. Art history and appraisal, I said. I was 2 semesters away from my master's when the money ran out. And you kept the loop. Tools of the trade. You don't throw them away just because you lose the workshop. He reached out and took the loop from my hand. His fingers brushed mine. Rough skin against smooth. A jolt of electricity shot up my arm, startling in its intensity. He held the small glass up to his own eye and looked at the blue paint I had indicated. Synthetic ultramarine. He muttered. French Guillemet, 1826. He lowered the loop and handed it back to me. My experts in London are going to have a very bad day tomorrow. He walked back around his desk and sat down in the massive leather chair. He looked at me differently now. The dismissive air from the night before, the attitude of a man dealing with a piece of luggage, was gone. He was looking at me like I was a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. I thought I bought a pretty face to hang on my arm, he said, his voice thoughtful. A distraction. Collateral to keep a gambler in line. I told you, I said, putting the loop back in my pocket. I'm pragmatic, and I'm not useless. No, he agreed. You are not. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The tailor will be here in 20 minutes. Get measured, get your wardrobe sorted. But after that, he paused, his eyes gleaming with a new idea. Come back here. Why? Because I have a warehouse full of assets that I acquired through various debt settlements. Paintings, sculptures, antiques. I use them to move capital across borders. But if I am moving fakes, I am vulnerable. He gestured to the empty chair opposite his desk. You wanted to know your role, Lucia. Sit down. I didn't move immediately. Does this mean the contract changes? The contract stands, he said firmly. You are still mine for 5 years. But how you spend those 5 years, that is negotiable. You can be a decoration, Lucia, or you can be an asset. The choice is yours. I looked at the chair. It was leather, high-backed, equal in height to his. If I sat there, I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a collaborator. I would be helping a mob boss optimize his money laundering. It was illegal. It was dangerous. It was everything I had been raised to avoid. But looking at Anthony Ravellini, at the intelligence in his eyes, the challenge in his posture, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to go back to my room and hide. I didn't want to be safe and bored. I wanted to sit in that chair. I walked forward and pulled the leather chair out. The sound of it scraping against the rug was the only noise in the room. I sat down, crossing my legs, and placed my hands on the mahogany desk. I charge a consultation fee, I said. Anthony threw his head back and laughed. A rich, deep sound that seemed to startle the dust motes in the air. It was the first time I had seen him look truly human. "We'll discuss your fee," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a heat that had nothing to do with art. "Now, tell me about the varnish on that degas in the hallway." I smiled. A small, sharp thing. "It's not a degas. It's a school of Paris imitation. And a bad one." The game had changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was playing. And for the first time in my life, I held cards that actually mattered. The cage was still there, but the door was wide open, and the hawk was inviting me to fly. "Tell me everything," Anthony commanded. And I did. 3 weeks had passed since I traded the peeling wallpaper of my father's living room for the panoramic views of Anthony Ravellini's penthouse. 3 weeks of silence, luxury, and a strange, exhilarating kind of work. The transition from captive to consultant had been seamless, almost terrifyingly so. I wasn't scrubbing floors or serving drinks. I was doing exactly what I had been trained to do in university, only the stakes were no longer grades or academic approval. They were millions of dollars in illicit capital. I sat at the mahogany desk in the library, a space that had quickly become my command center. Spread out before me were photographs, provenance documents, and shipping manifests. Anthony had given me access to the dead inventory, a collection of art and antiques acquired by the family over the last decade as payments for debts. Most of it was garbage. Gaudy statues, replicas sold to idiots, paintings by up-and-coming artists who never came up. But hidden in the pile were gems, and my job was to separate the wheat from the chaff, and more importantly, to identify the high-quality fakes that could be passed off as originals to less discerning buyers in the European black market. I picked up a file on a set of Ming Dynasty vases. My loupe was already in my hand. I didn't need to look hard to see the modern kiln marks on the base in the photograph. Fake. But good fakes. Trash? The voice came from the doorway. I didn't flinch. I had learned the rhythm of Anthony's footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, rhythmic. I looked up. Anthony was leaning against the doorframe, watching me. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Persian rug, but he seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He was wearing a navy suit today, the jacket unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Not trash," I corrected, tapping the photo. "Deceptive. These vases are late 20th century reproductions. The glaze is too consistent. But to an untrained eye, say, a drug runner in Miami looking to park some cash, they're worth 50 grand. To a museum, they're worth $50. Anthony walked into the room, stopping at the edge of the desk. He picked up the photo, studying it with that intensity that made me feel like he was dissecting the paper itself. "So we sell them to Miami," he concluded. "Market them as recovered heritage items," I suggested, keeping my voice professional. "Add a fake certificate of authenticity from a defunct Hong Kong gallery. I can draft one up by tonight, and you can ask for 80,000. A small smile touched his lips. It wasn't a nice smile, but it was an approving one. "You are dangerous, Lucia." "I'm efficient," I replied, closing the file. "You were losing money storing this junk. Now you're liquidating it. That's just good business." "It is," he agreed. He dropped the photo back onto the desk. "Finish up here. We have a dinner tonight." I paused. In the last 3 weeks, I hadn't left the penthouse. I had been perfectly content in my gilded tower, ordering room service and diving into art fraud. The outside world was where my father was. The outside world was where the O'Sullivan family operated. I wasn't eager to return to it. "A dinner?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "A business meeting. High level. My capos and a few associates from the West Coast. We are finalizing a distribution route, and you need me there because you are the face of my legitimacy," Anthony said. He walked around the desk, invading my personal space. He didn't touch me, but his proximity was a physical weight. "I am not just a thug with a gun, Lucia. I am a businessman. A man who appreciates culture. You are the proof of that. You are the beautiful, educated woman on my arm who discusses art and history while I discuss percentages and territory. You soften the edge. I'm a prop, I said flatly. You are armor, he corrected. Distraction is a weapon. If they are looking at you, they aren't looking at my hands. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the desk in front of me. Wear these. The dress has been delivered to your room. I stared at the box. I have clothes. You have sweaters and jeans, he said dismissively. Tonight requires something else. Be ready in an hour. And Lucia? I looked up at him. This isn't a request. He turned and left the library, leaving me alone with the silence and the velvet box. I opened it. Inside lay a pair of diamond drop earrings. They were simple, elegant, and undoubtedly real. I stared at the faceting of the stones. Flawless. D-color. Probably 3 carats each. I snapped the box shut. I wasn't going to be seduced by diamonds. I was doing a job. I was paying off a debt of time. 5 years. I just had to survive 5 years of dinners, fakes, and Anthony Ravellini. I went to my room. The dress was hanging on the wardrobe door. I stopped in my tracks. I had expected black. Safe, classic black. Or maybe red, the color of a cliché. But the silk flowing from the hanger was neither. It was a deep, rich burgundy, the color of oxidized blood, of heavy wine, of crushed velvet in an old theater. It was a sophisticated, dangerous color. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was heavy silk satin, cool to the touch. I stripped off my work clothes and stepped into it. The dress fit as if it had been sewn onto my skin. It had a high neck, deceptive in its modesty, but the back plunged low, exposing my spine. It clung to my hips and pooled slightly at the floor. I sat at the vanity and did my hair, pulling it into a sleek, low chignon. I put on the earrings. They caught the light, framing my face in cold fire. I applied lipstick, a dark berry shade that matched the dress. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Lucia Evans, the girl who hid from debt collectors. I saw a woman who looked like she belonged in a palace, or a war room. I looked formidable. I walked out into the living room exactly an hour later. Anthony was waiting by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when he heard my heels on the marble. He stopped. His eyes swept over me, starting from my shoes and traveling slowly up to my face. He didn't leer. He didn't look at me with hungry animal lust. He looked at me with a profound, terrifying appreciation. Burgundy, he said quietly. It suits you better than black. It's a bold choice, I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart hammered against my ribs. We are not hiding tonight, he said. He walked over and offered me his arm. Shall we? I took his arm. His muscles were hard as granite beneath the fine wool of his suit. Lead the way, Mr. Ravellini. Anthony, he corrected. Tonight you call me Anthony. The restaurant was called Il Silenzio. It was one of those places that didn't have a sign out front, just a heavy wooden door and a bouncer who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of truffle oil. It was dimly lit, the walls lined with dark wood paneling. The other diners were men in expensive suits, talking in hushed tones. There were very few women. Anthony guided me to a private room in the back. The air in the room changed instantly. It was cooler, sharper. A large round table dominated the space. 5 men were already seated. They all stood up when Anthony entered. Don Ravellini, one of them greeted, bowing his head slightly. Gentlemen, Anthony replied. He didn't bow back. He guided me to the chair to his right and waited for me to sit before taking his own seat. The men sat down. I scanned the table. I recognized 2 of them from the files I had seen in the office. Associates from the West Coast. But the man sitting directly across from me was new. He was older, perhaps 50, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of aggressive meat. His skin was flushed, his eyes watery and bloodshot. He had a glass of whiskey in front of him that was already half empty. Who's the bird, Anthony? The man asked, his voice grating and loud. I thought this was a business dinner, not a date night. Anthony poured himself a glass of water. He didn't look at the man. This is Lucia. She is my consultant. Consultant? The man laughed, a wet, ugly sound. Is that what we're calling them now? In my day, we just called them whores. The silence that fell over the table was instant and absolute. The other men looked down at their plates or adjusted their cufflinks. Insulting the boss's companion was suicide. Anthony stopped pouring. The pitcher hovered in the air for a second before he set it down with a deliberate clink. "Lucia manages my private acquisitions," Anthony said, his voice dropping an octave. "She has more education in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline, Verciani. I suggest you show respect." So this was Verciani, a capo from the Jersey faction, notorious for his temper and his inability to handle alcohol. Verciani sneered, leaning back in his chair. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my chest. Education. Right. Does she know how to count, or just how to spend? I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp. But I didn't let it show. I picked up my napkin and unfolded it calmly. "I know how to count, Mr. Verciani," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. "For example, I count 3 empty glasses in front of you, which explains why you're slurring your words before the appetizers have even arrived." Verciani's face turned a darker shade of red. The man next to him choked on a laugh. Anthony didn't look at me, but I saw his hand tighten slightly on the stem of his water glass. "She speaks," Verciani mocked. "Listen, sweetheart, the men are talking. Why don't you sit there and look pretty? Anthony, order a bottle of the good stuff. I want to celebrate the deal." He snapped his fingers at a waiter who had materialized in the corner. "Boy, bring us the 82 Latour. The boss is paying." The waiter looked at Anthony for confirmation. Anthony gave a barely perceptible nod. When the bottle arrived, Verciani made a show of inspecting it. "Ah, Chateau Latour, 1982, the king of wines. You see this?" He pointed the bottle at me. "This bottle costs more than your daddy made in a year." He didn't know how right he was. My father never made anything. The waiter poured a splash into Verciani's glass for the tasting. Verciani swirled it aggressively, spilling a drop on the white tablecloth. He took a massive gulp, swishing it around his mouth like mouthwash. "Perfection," he announced. "Notes of leather and tobacco, smooth as silk. Pour it for everyone." The waiter moved to pour, but I raised my hand. "Wait," I said. Verciani slammed his glass down. "What now?" I looked at the bottle in the waiter's hand. "I didn't need the loop for this. It's a fake," I said clearly. The room went dead silent again. Verciani stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Excuse me?" He spat. "The bottle," I said, gesturing to the label. "It's a counterfeit. A refilled bottle, to be precise." "You don't know what the hell you're talking about," Verciani growled. "This is from the restaurant's private reserve. Then the restaurant is being cheated, or they are cheating you," I said, leaning forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "Look at the capsule, Mr. Verciani. The Chateau Latour 1982 capsules were made of a specific lead alloy that oxidizes to a dull gray over 40 years. That capsule is shiny aluminum. And the label? The font on the vintage year is slightly too bold. It's a high-quality photocopy glued onto an old bottle." I turned to the waiter, who was looking pale. "And if you open it, the cork will likely be branded with a different year, or it will look surprisingly new for a 40-year-old wine. Am I right?" The waiter swallowed hard. I can check the cellar, madam. We have had issues with the supplier recently." I turned back to Verciani. "You just drank swill, probably a decent table wine mixed with a little brandy to fake the aging, and you called it perfection. You praised the notes of leather. The only leather here is the shoe you just put in your mouth." The man to Verciani's left let out a snort of laughter that he quickly turned into a cough. Anthony remained perfectly still, but there was a light in his eyes, a fierce, burning pride. Verciani was vibrating. The humiliation was total. He had been exposed as a fool in front of his peers by a woman he had dismissed as a whore. He stood up so fast his chair crashed backward onto the floor. "You little bitch," he roared. He lunged across the table. His hand, heavy, meaty, and fast, swung toward my face. I didn't have time to move. I flinched, bracing for the impact, closing my eyes. But the blow never landed. There was a dull thud of flesh hitting flesh, but not mine. I opened my eyes. Anthony was standing. He had moved with a speed that defied physics. His left hand was wrapped around Verciani's wrist, stopping it inches from my cheek. His grip was so tight that Verciani's fingers were turning purple. The air in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Anthony didn't shout. He didn't roar. He leaned in, his face inches from Verciani's sweating forehead. His voice was a whisper, but it carried more violence than a gunshot. "She is not a consultant," Anthony said, his eyes black voids of rage. "She is my partner. You insult her. You insult me. You try to touch her." He twisted Verciani's wrist. There was a sickening pop of cartilage. Verciani let out a strangled yelp, dropping to his knees. "And you lose the hand," Anthony finished. He shoved Verciani back. The capo collapsed onto the floor, clutching his wrist, wheezing. "Get him out of here," Anthony ordered the guards. "And tell the kitchen to bring me a real bottle. I won't pay for garbage." The guards dragged Verciani out. The other men at the table sat in stunned silence. They weren't looking at Anthony with fear anymore. They were looking at me with fear. Because I was the woman who had just caused a capo to be broken, and I hadn't even raised my voice. Anthony sat back down. He adjusted his cuffs. He turned to me. "Are you all right?" he asked. I looked at his hands. The hands that had just crushed a man's wrist to protect me. My heart was racing. But not from terror. It was racing from adrenaline. "I'm fine," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "But he really does have terrible taste in wine." Anthony looked at me for a long moment. Then he started to laugh. It was a low, dark sound. "Yes," he said. "He does." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. The men treated me like royalty. They asked my opinion on the food, the decor, the business. I played the part. I was charming, I was intelligent, I was deadly. But all I could think about was the heat of Anthony's body next to mine, and the way he had moved to shield me. The ride home was quiet. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows of the SUV. The partition was up, separating us from the driver. I sat in the corner of the seat, watching the rain start to streak against the glass. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a shaky exhaustion. I felt a hand on mine. I looked down. Anthony's hand was covering mine on the leather seat. His skin was warm. "You're shaking," he said. "Just a little," I admitted. I've never been the cause of violence before." "You weren't the cause," he said firmly. His ego was the cause. "You were just the mirror that showed him how ugly he is." He squeezed my hand. "You did well tonight, Lucia. Better than well. You commanded that room. I just pointed out a fake label. No. You stood your ground. Most people crumble when a man like Verciani barks. You bit back." He turned his body toward me. The streetlights flickered across his face, illuminating the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. "I told you I protect what I value," he said softly. "And am I valuable?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Or am I just a useful asset for spotting fake wine?" Anthony released my hand and reached up. He brushed his knuckles against my cheek, right where Verciani would have struck me. The touch was feather-light, a shocking contrast to the violence he had displayed an hour ago. "You are not just an asset, Lucia," he whispered. His thumb traced my lower lip. My breath hitched. The air in the car suddenly felt too thin. "An asset is replaceable. You are proving to be distinct." I stared at him. For the first time, I saw the man behind the Mafia boss title. I saw a man who was lonely at the top of his mountain. A man who was tired of being surrounded by sycophants and brutes. I saw a man who recognized a fellow survivor. I leaned into his touch, just a fraction of an inch. It was an involuntary movement, a magnetic pull. "Distinct is good," I whispered. "Distinct is dangerous," he murmured, his eyes dropping to my lips. For a second, I thought he was going to kiss me. The tension was a pulled rubber band, ready to snap. I wanted him to. God help me. I wanted the man who owned me to claim me. Not because of a contract, but because of this fire between us. But he pulled back. He withdrew his hand and straightened his tie, the mask of the Don sliding back into place. "We're home," he said, as the car turned into the garage. The moment was broken, but the energy remained. As we walked to the elevator, he didn't walk ahead of me. He walked beside me. I wasn't walking behind him anymore. Tonight had changed everything. I wasn't just the girl in the corner. I was the woman in burgundy who had brought a capo to his knees. And Anthony Ravellini was no longer just my captor. He was my partner in a dance I was just beginning to learn the steps to. I looked at my reflection in the elevator doors. The diamonds sparkled, cold and hard. But my eyes were burning. I had survived the dinner. I had survived Versiani, and looking at Anthony's profile as the doors opened to our penthouse, I realized the most dangerous thing of all. I was starting to like the view from the top, and I wasn't sure I ever wanted to come down. The invitation on the marble counter said, "The Whispering Hope Charity Gala," a name so sickly sweet it could only belong to an event run by the city's most ruthless tax evaders. It was the biggest night of the social season, a black-tie affair where alliances were forged over caviar and reputations were destroyed with a whisper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering how to sneak into such a world. I was expected to conquer it. I stood before the full-length mirror in my room, the silence of the penthouse wrapping around me like a second skin. The dress Anthony had commissioned for me was not merely a garment. It was a statement of war disguised as couture. It wasn't the deep burgundy of the private dinner, nor was it the safe black of a shadow. It was pale gold. The silk was liquid, cascading down my body in a way that mimicked movement, even when I was perfectly still. It caught the light of the chandelier and threw it back, softened, making my skin glow. The neckline was architectural, a sharp plunge that stopped just before indecency, held together by sheer engineering and confidence. The back was entirely open, exposing my spine to the cool air of the room. It was a dress that demanded attention. It was a dress that said I didn't need to hide in corners anymore. I adjusted the diamond drop earrings, the same ones from the dinner, and checked my reflection. The girl who had packed her life into a duffel bag under the gaze of a debt collector was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew the market value of a fake Renoir and the breaking point of a Jersey capo. A knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps. "Come in," I said, not turning away from the mirror. Anthony opened the door. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him with lethal precision. The peak lapels were sharp enough to cut, the white shirt crisp against his tan skin. He looked like the prince of a dark kingdom, which, in many ways, he was. He stopped 2 steps into the room. I saw his reflection freeze in the glass. His dark eyes traveled up the line of the gold silk, tracing the curve of my waist, the slope of my exposed back, and finally meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Gold," he stated, his voice low. "You said we weren't hiding," I replied, turning slowly to face him. This seemed appropriate. He walked toward me, entering my personal space with the gravitational pull of a planet. He didn't touch me immediately. He let the tension build, that electric hum that had been growing between us since the night at Il Silencio. "Appropriate is an understatement," he murmured. "You look like a trophy, Lucia. The kind men kill each other to possess." "I thought I was a partner," I challenged softly. "Tonight, you are both." He reached out, his fingers brushing the bare skin of my arm. The contact sent a jolt straight to my core, but I held his gaze. "The O'Sullivans will be there. The Russos. The heads of the 5 families. They need to see you and think that I have captured the sun. They need to believe I am so powerful I can wear gold without fearing who might try to snatch it." "Let them try," I said. The words came out with a fierceness that surprised me. Anthony smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "That is the spirit. But stay close to me. The sharks are circling tonight and they smell fresh blood." "I'm not blood," I said, picking up my clutch. "I'm the hook." He chuckled, offering his arm. "Then let's go fishing." The venue was the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a cavernous space dripping with crystal and old money. The air smelled of expensive lilies, heavy perfume, and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. A string quartet played in the corner, the music barely audible over the roar of 300 wealthy people pretending to like each other. Our entrance was exactly what Anthony had orchestrated. When we stepped onto the balcony overlooking the ballroom, heads turned. The murmur of conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. The pitch changed. I felt hundreds of eyes on the gold dress, on Anthony's hand resting possessively on the small of my back. We descended the grand staircase. I didn't look down at my feet. I looked straight ahead, scanning the room as Anthony had taught me. 3 o'clock, Anthony whispered, his lips barely moving. Senator Mitchell, in his pocket for 10 years. 7 o'clock, Don Russo, neutral but leaning towards our side. 12 o'clock, the O'Sullivan table. I looked. The O'Sullivan table was the center of gravity for the opposition. Seated there was Patrick O'Sullivan, a man who looked like a bulldog stuffed into a suit, surrounded by his lieutenants and their wives. The women were draped in emeralds and sapphires, their expressions tight and watchful. They look unhappy, I noted. They lost a shipment last week, Anthony said casually. Customs seized it. They think I tipped off the feds. Did you? I don't talk to the feds, Lucia, but I don't correct my enemies when they make mistakes either. We reached the floor and were immediately swarmed. For the next hour, I was the perfect diplomat. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I discussed the decline of neoclassical architecture with a banker who was clearly laundering money for the cartels. I charmed the wife of a judge by complimenting her hideous brooch. Through it all, Anthony was a constant presence at my side. He didn't hover, but he was always there, a hand on my elbow, a body blocking a crowded path. We moved as a unit. When I spoke, he listened with visible respect, signaling to the room that dismissing me would be a fatal error. I was enjoying myself. The power was intoxicating. I was navigating a minefield in stilettos, and I hadn't triggered a single explosion. I need a moment, Anthony whispered in my ear after extricating us from a conversation with a particularly dull city councilman. I have to speak with Russo privately. 5 minutes. Stay in the main circle. Don't wander. I'll be fine, I assured him. I'll get a water. He hesitated, scanning the room once more, then nodded. 5 minutes. He disappeared into the crowd toward the smoking terrace. I walked to the bar, my head high. I ordered a sparkling water with lime. The bartender served me with trembling hands. I turned to survey the room, taking a sip. That dress is a bold choice for a mistress. The voice was sweet, laced with arsenic. I turned. Standing next to me was a woman I had seen at the O'Sullivan table. She was older, perhaps 45, wearing a dark green velvet gown that looked heavy and suffocating. Her neck was choked with diamonds that looked like ice. I prefer consultant, I replied smoothly. And the dress is vintage. You wouldn't recognize the designer. He doesn't sell to department stores. The woman's smile didn't waver. Sharp tongue. Anthony always did like them feisty. I'm Eleanor O'Sullivan, Patrick's wife. Lucia, I said, omitting the surname as per my instructions. Just Lucia? Eleanor stepped closer. She smelled of gin and desperate preservation. We know who you are, dear. We know exactly who you are. My grip on the crystal glass tightened. Then you have the advantage, Mrs. O'Sullivan. Because to me, you're just another wife waiting for her husband to tell her what to think. Eleanor's eyes flashed with cold malice. You think you're safe because he put you in silk? You think you're special? You're just payment, a receipt walking around in heels. If you'll excuse me, I said, moving to step around her. Your father sends his regards, she whispered. I froze. The ambient noise of the party seemed to drop away, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I turned back to her slowly. What did you say? Thomas, she purred, seeing she had drawn blood. He's a charming man. Terribly unlucky, though. He just can't seem to stay away from the tables. Atlantic City, mostly. But last week, well, he found a private game in Queens. Our game. My stomach turned to ice. My father's debts are his own. Not anymore, Eleanor said. She looked around to ensure no one was listening, then stepped into my personal space. He owes us, Lucia. 100,000. A pittance compared to what he owed Anthony, sure. But Thomas doesn't have a daughter left to sell, does he? He already spent that currency. I don't care, I said, though my voice trembled slightly. Kill him. Break his legs. It has nothing to do with me. Doesn't it? Eleanor reached into her clutch. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small folded cocktail napkin. She pressed it into my hand. He didn't have money, dear, but he had information. He told us he talks to you. He told us he knows the route Anthony uses for the midnight transfers. He's lying, I hissed. I don't talk to him. I don't know the routes. But Anthony thinks you're loyal. She smiled, a horrific, triumphant expression. Thomas is selling us the schedule, Lucia. He claims he got it from you. He says you're playing the long con, that you're feeding him intel to buy his freedom. My world tilted. It was a lie. A vicious, destructive lie. But in this world, perception was reality. If the O'Sullivans spread the rumor that I was the leak, that I was feeding my father information, Anthony would have to kill me. He couldn't afford the weakness. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because we don't want the schedule, she said, leaning in close, her breath hot on my ear. We want Anthony. You're going to confirm the route. You're going to tell us exactly when the shipment leaves the warehouse tonight. If you do, we forgive your father's debt. If you don't, well, we tell Anthony that his precious little consultant is a double agent working for her daddy, and we'll provide the proof Thomas manufactured. She patted my cheek. It took everything in me not to slap her hand away. Think about it. The ladies' room is down the hall. Meet me there in 10 minutes with the time and location. Or watch your golden life burn. She walked away, blending back into the crowd like a venomous snake sliding into the grass. I stood there, the cocktail napkin burning my palm. I unfolded it. It was a list of dates. Anthony's dates. My father hadn't just gambled money. He had gambled my life. He was framing me to save his own skin, using the O'Sullivans as the executioner. I looked across the room. Anthony was walking back from the terrace. He looked powerful, untouchable. If I told him, would he believe me? Or would the seed of doubt be enough to destroy us? The O'Sullivans were banking on my fear. They were banking on me trying to fix this alone, trying to hide the mess. I looked at the napkin again. Then I looked at Anthony. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the glass of water on the table with a clatter and walked straight toward him. I didn't care about the senator he was about to greet. I didn't care about the protocol. I cut through the crowd, my gold dress flowing like a banner of distress. Anthony saw me coming. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of razor-sharp alert. He stepped away from the group he was approaching and met me halfway. "Lucia?" he asked, his hand instantly finding my waist. "What happened?" "We need to leave," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steel. Now. He didn't ask why. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He didn't worry about the social fallout. He saw the look in my eyes, the terror I was trying to suppress, and he acted. "Guard," he said to the air, and instantly 2 of his men materialized from the shadows. "Car, out front, 10 seconds. He guided me toward the exit, his body shielding mine from the room. We moved fast. The valet was already opening the door of the SUV before we even hit the sidewalk. We dove into the back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing us in the safety of the dark leather. "Go," Anthony ordered the driver. "Penthouse, counter-surveillance route." The car surged forward. Anthony turned to me. He didn't touch me yet. He waited. "Tell me." I opened my hand and dropped the crumpled napkin onto his knee. "The O'Sullivans," I said, the words tumbling out. "Eleanor." She cornered me. "My father." I choked on the word, a bitter bile in my throat. "My father owes them. He's back gambling. And to pay them, he's selling them lies." Anthony picked up the napkin. He scanned the dates in the dim light of the passing street lamps. His face was a mask of stone. "He told them I'm the leak," I continued, forcing myself to be clear. "He told them I'm feeding him information on your shipments. Eleanor said if I don't give them the real route for tonight, they'll come to you with proof that I'm a traitor." I looked at him, searching for doubt. Searching for the moment he would decide I was a liability. "I didn't tell him anything, Anthony. I haven't spoken to him since the night you took me. You have to believe me." Anthony looked at the napkin. Then he slowly crushed it in his fist. The sound of the paper crumpling was loud in the quiet car. "She gave you 10 minutes," Anthony said. It wasn't a question. She wanted me to meet her in the bathroom, to confirm the route. And instead, you came to me. Yes, you realize that by telling me this, you are effectively signing your father's death warrant, Anthony asked. His voice was devoid of emotion, purely analytical. If he is selling lies about my operation to my enemies, if he is threatening my household to cover his debts, I cannot let him live, Lucia. You know this. I looked out the window. I saw the city passing by, the city where I had lived in fear for so long because of Thomas Evans. I thought of the man who had sold me for a clear ledger. I thought of the man sitting next to me, who had given me a home, a purpose, and who had broken a man's wrist for insulting me. The choice wasn't hard. It was painful, like cutting off a gangrenous limb, but it was necessary. I turned back to Anthony. He stopped being my father the moment he pointed at me in that living room and put a price on my head. I said steadily, "I am not an Evans anymore. You told me that. I am yours." Anthony stared at me. For a long, agonizing minute, he didn't move. He was reading me, looking for the lie, looking for the hesitation. Then, he reached out. He took my hand, the one that had held the napkin, and brought it to his lips. He pressed a kiss to my knuckles, slow and deliberate. It wasn't just a gesture of affection. It was a seal, a knight swearing fealty to his queen. "He tried to use you as a weapon against me," Anthony whispered against my skin. "He thought you were weak. He thought you would panic and hide. He doesn't know me," I whispered back. "No," Anthony agreed. He lowered my hand but didn't let go. His fingers interlaced with mine, locking us together. "But I do." He tapped the partition glass. The driver lowered it an inch. "Change of plans," Anthony said. "Cancel the shipment tonight. Initiate protocol silence on the warehouses, and find Thomas Evans. I don't care where he is. Turn over every rock in Queens." "Yes, boss." The window went up. Anthony looked back at me. The fury was there now, burning deep in his eyes. But it wasn't directed at me. It was a cold, protective rage that made the air in the car vibrate. "You chose me," he said, sounding almost awed by the fact. "I chose the person who protects me," I said. "I chose the person who sees me." He pulled me across the seat, hauling me into his lap. The gold dress spilled over his dark trousers like molten metal. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. "You are not just payment, Lucia," he growled against my pulse. "You are the most dangerous thing I have ever owned, and I will burn the city to the ground before I let them touch you." I wrapped my arms around his shoulders, holding on tight. The car sped through the night, carrying us away from the gala, away from the lies, and towards a war that was now inevitable. "What do we do now?" I asked. Anthony pulled back to look at me. His eyes were hard, but his hand on my waist was gentle. "Now," he said, "we stop playing defense. If the O'Sullivans want a war, we give them a massacre. And your father is going to learn that some debts can't be paid with money." I didn't flinch. I didn't beg for mercy. I nodded. "Okay," I said, and in that word, I sealed my fate. I wasn't an observer anymore. I was an accomplice, and as Anthony's lips crashed onto mine, searing and possessive, I realized I wouldn't have it any other way. The girl in the corner was dead. The woman in the gold dress was ready to reign. The transition from the golden warmth of the gala to the cold, militaristic precision of the penthouse was jarring. The silence that filled the apartment wasn't the peaceful quiet of luxury anymore. It was the holding breath of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. Anthony moved with a terrifying efficiency. He had stripped off his tuxedo jacket and the silk tie, replacing them with a tactical vest that he strapped over his white dress shirt. He didn't look like a businessman now. He didn't even look like a mob boss. He looked like a soldier preparing for a siege. I stood by the kitchen island, still wearing the gold dress, though I felt ridiculous in it now. The silk felt too thin, too fragile for the reality that had just crashed into our lives. "The perimeter is sealed," Anthony said, checking the magazine of a handgun. before sliding it into a holster at his hip. "I have 6 men in the lobby, 2 in the elevator shaft, and 3 on the roof. The blast shutters are down on the windows. You are safer here than in the president's bunker. And you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Where are you going?" "To end it," he replied. He walked over to me, stopping just inches away. The smell of expensive cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of gun oil and cold resolve. He reached out, cupping my face in his hands. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. "I am going to find your father. I am going to find the O'Sullivans. And I am going to make sure they never threaten this house again." "Don't go alone," I whispered. "I'm not alone. I have my best men. But I need to lead this, Lucia. They insulted me. They threatened you. This is personal." He leaned his forehead against mine. "Stay here. Do not open the door for anyone but me. If the secure line rings, answer it. It will be the code word Vesuvius. That means extraction. Do you understand?" "Vesuvius," I repeated. "I understand." He kissed me then. It wasn't gentle. It was hard, possessive, a promise of return. Then he pulled away, turned, and walked out the door without looking back. The heavy lock clicked into place, sealing me inside the golden cage. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. I should have gone to my room. I should have taken a bath, washed off the night, and waited like a good little asset. But my mind was racing. The image of Eleanor O'Sullivan's smile, the venom in her voice when she spoke of my father, the absolute certainty that Thomas Evans was selling me out, it all churned in my stomach like acid. I couldn't just sit. I went to my room and stripped off the gold dress, letting it pool on the floor like shed skin. I pulled on black jeans, heavy boots, and a dark cashmere sweater. I needed to feel armored. Then, I went to the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Taped to the underside was a burner phone. An old, cracked smartphone that had belonged to my father years ago. I had kept it not out of sentiment, but out of paranoia. When I moved in, I had swapped the SIM card for a prepaid one I'd bought with cash from the antique shop job. Anthony knew everything about me, but he didn't know about this phone. Everyone needs a secret, I had told myself. I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, the battery bar hovering at 15%. It vibrated immediately. My heart slammed against my ribs. No one had this number. No one except the emergency contact list I had set up for my father years ago in case he ended up in a hospital or a ditch. I opened the message. Sender, Dad. Time, 11:42. Lucia. I know you hate me. I know what Eleanor told you. She's lying. I'm not selling you out. I'm trying to save you. They know Anthony is coming. It's an ambush. The driver, Marco, is on their payroll. They are taking him to the shipping yards, not Queens. Pier 4, they have a sniper team waiting. Please, I messed up, but I won't let you die. Tell him. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. A trap. My mind raced, analyzing the data like I analyzed a fraudulent painting. Was it true? My father was a liar. Yes. A manipulator, absolutely. But he was also a coward. If Anthony died, the Ravellini empire would crumble, and the O'Sullivans would have no reason to keep Thomas alive. His safety depended on the balance of power. If the O'Sullivans took over, they would just kill him to tie up loose ends. His only chance of survival was chaos, or Anthony winning. The logic held. The driver? Marco. I had seen him talking to one of the O'Sullivan guards at the gala. Just a nod. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now? I dialed Anthony's number on the secure house line. Beep, beep, beep. The number you have reached is not in service. Protocol silence. He had cut communications to prevent tracking. He was walking into a kill box, and he was deaf to the warning. I paced the living room floor. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced it down. I was Lucia Evans. I was the woman who spotted a fake Chagall from across the room. I didn't panic. I solved problems. If I stayed here, Anthony would go to the shipping yards. Marco would drive him right into the crosshairs. Anthony would die. And then the O'Sullivans would come here, override the security with Marco's help, and drag me out. If I left, I stopped pacing. I looked at the message again. Pier 4. I knew Pier 4. It was an old Ravellini drop point that had been abandoned years ago. It was isolated. If I could get there, if I could get close enough to signal him, or create a distraction, but I couldn't just walk out. The guards in the lobby would stop me, unless I gave them a reason not to. I ran to the office. I grabbed a piece of heavy stationery from Anthony's desk. I wrote quickly, my handwriting sharp and angular. Protocol override. Thomas contacted me. He claims ambush at Pier 4. I have the encryption keys for the O'Sullivan accounts. The bluff. I am going to the secondary extraction point to trade for the intel. Do not follow me. Secure the perimeter. I will contact via Vesuvius channel. It was a lie, partially. But it sounded authoritative. It sounded like something the partner of Anthony Ravellini would do. I left the note on the kitchen island, right next to his espresso machine where the head of security would check during his rounds in 20 minutes. Then, I went to the service elevator. I knew the code. I had watched Anthony punch it in 3 weeks ago. 1982. The year of the fake wine. He had a sense of humor. I punched it in. The doors slid open. I took a deep breath. I was leaving the safety of the fortress. I was walking back into the dark, but as the elevator descended, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a player moving a piece on the board. Getting out of the building was easier than it should have been, which should have been my first warning. I used the service exit that led into the alleyway, bypassing the main lobby guards. The night air was freezing, biting through my sweater. I didn't take one of Anthony's cars. They were all tracked. I walked 3 blocks, keeping to the shadows, my boots silent on the wet pavement. I found a taxi stand near the metro station. Queens, I told the driver, near the shipyards, and step on it. The ride was a blur of neon lights and rain-streaked windows. I gripped the burner phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept checking the time. 12:15 a.m. Anthony would be arriving soon. The taxi dropped me off a block away from the entrance to the pier. The area was desolate. Rusted fences, piles of shipping containers, the smell of salt water and rotting wood. I paid the driver with the cash I had stashed in my boot weeks ago and waited for him to leave. I moved toward Pier 4. It was dark, the only light coming from a single floodlight buzzing overhead. I didn't see Anthony's SUV. I didn't see Marco. I crept closer, hiding behind a stack of wooden pallets. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure it echoed off the metal containers. "Dad?" I whispered, looking at the phone. "Where are you?" My phone buzzed. "Inside the warehouse, 2nd floor office. I can see the entrance. Hurry, they're setting up." I looked at the warehouse. The side door was slightly ajar. Logic told me to wait. Logic told me to wait for Anthony. But fear for the man I loved, overrode the logic. If the sniper was already set up, Anthony wouldn't even make it out of the car. I slipped through the side door. The warehouse was cavernous, filled with shadows and the sound of dripping water. I kept low, moving toward the metal staircase that led to the foreman's office overlooking the floor. I climbed the stairs, testing each step for sound. I reached the top. The office door was closed. I could see a sliver of light underneath it. I took a breath, reached into my boot, and pulled out a small switchblade I had swiped from Anthony's collection in the library. It wasn't much against guns, but it was better than fingernails. I pushed the door open. "Dad?" Thomas Evans was sitting in a rolling chair in the center of the room. He wasn't tied up. He wasn't bleeding. He was holding a sandwich in one hand and a bottle of beer in the other. He looked up at me, and for a second, he looked surprised. Then a slow, pathetic smile spread across his face. "You actually came," he said, chewing. "I told them you would. I told them you were loyal." I froze. The knife felt heavy in my hand. I looked around the room. It was empty. No snipers. No view of the ambush. Just my father, looking comfortable. "Where is the ambush?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Where is Anthony?" "Anthony isn't coming here, Lucia," Thomas said, taking a sip of beer. "Anthony is halfway to Jersey by now, chasing a ghost lead I gave Eleanor to feed him. He's fine. Well, he's furious, but he's alive." The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The air left my lungs. "You lied," I said. "I improvised," he corrected. He set the beer down. "See, the O'Sullivans, they didn't want Anthony tonight. They wanted you. They figured if they attacked the penthouse, Anthony would turn it into a fortress. They'd lose 50 men trying to get in. But if I could convince you that he was in danger, well, you'd walk right out the front door." He stood up, wiping crumbs from his shirt. "And look at you. You did. You walked right into the trade." "Trade?" I stepped back, gripping the knife. "What trade?" "My debt for you," Thomas said simply. 100 grand. That's what I owe. Eleanor said if I delivered you, the slate is clean. Plus, they give me a bus ticket to Florida and 5 grand in walking around money." He looked at me with those watery, weak eyes, the eyes I had inherited. "It's a good deal, Lucia. Anthony will find another girl. He's rich. But me? I was out of options. You sold me," I whispered. "Again." "I saved myself," he snapped, his voice rising. "Do you know what they do to people who don't pay? They were going to cut off my fingers, Lucia, one by one. You're young. You're pretty. You'll survive whatever they want. You're tough. Like your mother. Don't you dare speak her name," I hissed. I raised the knife. "You are sick. You are a disease. I'm a survivor," he yelled. "Just like you." "No." A deep voice came from the shadows behind me. "She is nothing like you." I spun around. Emerging from the darkness of the stairwell were 3 men. I recognized the center one immediately. Patrick O'Sullivan, the bulldog from the gala. He was flanked by 2 guards who looked like they were carved out of granite. "Drop the knife, darling," Patrick said, his voice grating like gravel. "Or I shoot your father," which, honestly, would be doing the world a favor. But a deal is a deal. I looked at Patrick. Then I looked at Thomas. My father was shrinking back, looking terrified now that the reality of the O'Sullivans was in the room. "Lucia, put it down," Thomas pleaded. "Don't make them mad." I looked at the knife. It was useless against 3 armed men. I wasn't going to win a firefight. Not here, not alone. I dropped the knife. It clattered loudly on the metal floor. "Smart girl," Patrick grinned. He signaled his men. One of them moved forward, grabbing my arms and twisting them behind my back. He slapped a pair of zip ties onto my wrists. The plastic bit into my skin, tight and painful. "The debt is cleared?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. "I can go?" Patrick looked at Thomas with pure disgust. "Yeah, you can go. Get out of my city, Evans. If I see you again, I'll kill you just for the smell." Thomas didn't wait. He grabbed his jacket. He started to walk toward the door, passing me. He paused for a second. He looked at me, bound and captured because I had tried to save the man I loved. Because I had believed, for one stupid second, that my father had a shred of humanity left. "It's for the best, Lucia," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "You'll see." Rage, cold and absolute, flooded my veins. It replaced the fear. It replaced the shock. "Thomas," I said. He looked up, surprised I spoke. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I gathered every ounce of saliva in my mouth and spat right in his face. It hit him on the cheek, running down toward his chin. He flinched back as if I had burned him. "You aren't my father," I said, my voice dead calm. "And you didn't save yourself. You just dug a grave. Because when Anthony finds out what you did, Florida won't be far enough. Hell won't be far enough." Thomas wiped his face, looking shaken. He didn't say anything else. He turned and ran out of the room, a rat scurrying off a sinking ship. Patrick O'Sullivan laughed. He walked over to me, grabbing my chin roughly in his hand. He forced me to look at him. "You got fire," he noted. "I like that. Anthony always did have a taste for the wild ones." "He's going to kill you," I said. "He's going to burn this entire city down to find me." Patrick's smile faded. "Let him try. By the time he finds you, darling, you're going to be the bait in a trap so big even he can't chew his way out of it." He pulled a black hood from his pocket. "Nighty night, princess." He jammed the hood over my head. My world went black. The last thing I smelled was the stale beer my father had been drinking and the cheap cologne of the O'Sullivan goon. I didn't struggle as they dragged me out. I didn't scream. I saved my energy. I thought about the note I had left. I thought about the encryption keys I had mentioned. The bluff. And I thought about Anthony. He hadn't been ambushed. He was safe. He was alive. And that meant he was coming. "Hold on," I told myself as they threw me into the back of a van. Just hold on. The engine roared to life, and the van lurched forward, carrying me away from the only home I had ever known. But as the darkness swallowed me, I didn't feel helpless. I felt a cold, calculating resolve hardening in my chest. My father had sold me for a bus ticket. The O'Sullivans had taken me for leverage, but they had all made one critical mistake. They thought they had captured a damsel. They didn't realize they had just kidnapped the queen. And the king was about to flip the board. The hood was ripped off my head, taking a few strands of hair with it. The sudden assault of fluorescent light was blinding, stinging my eyes like acid. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the spots dancing in my vision, forcing my senses to recalibrate. The smell hit me first: diesel fumes, rust, and the metallic tang of old blood. I was seated in a metal chair, my wrists zip-tied painfully behind my back, my ankles bound to the chair legs. Welcome back to the land of the living, sleeping beauty. Patrick O'Sullivan was leaning against a stack of crates a few feet away, twirling a heavy black pistol around his finger. We weren't in the office anymore. We were on the ground floor of a massive warehouse, a cathedral of corrugated steel and concrete. It was cold, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones and stays there. I straightened my spine. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me slump. "You're making a mistake," I said. My voice was raspy, but steady. "I don't think so." Patrick grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "I have the girl. I have the leverage. And soon I'll have the encryption keys to Ravellini's offshore accounts. Unless you lied about those?" "I didn't lie," I said, maintaining the bluff I had written in the note. "But I don't carry them in my head. They're on a secure server. You need my biometrics to access them." "We'll get your biometrics," he said dismissively. "One way or another. Fingerprints are easy to take, even if they aren't attached to the hand anymore." I felt a cold shiver trace down my spine, but I locked it away. "Anthony will be here." "Anthony is chasing his tail in Jersey," Patrick laughed. "Your daddy did a good job, sold the lie perfectly." "Did he?" The voice didn't come from me. It came from the shadows near the loading dock doors. Patrick spun around, raising his gun. His 6 guards, positioned around the perimeter, snapped their weapons up. Emerging from the darkness wasn't a SWAT team. It wasn't a roaring army. It was just Anthony Ravellini. He walked into the circle of light with a terrifying, casual grace. He wasn't wearing his tactical vest anymore. He had discarded it, leaving him in a white dress shirt that was stark against the gloom. His hands were empty. He held them out to his sides, palms open. "Anthony," Patrick sneered, though I saw his grip on the gun tighten. "You're faster than I thought. But you're stupid. Walking in here alone?" "I'm not alone," Anthony said calmly. He stopped 10 feet away from us. He didn't look at Patrick. He looked at me. His dark eyes swept over my face, checking for bruises, for blood. When he saw I was unharmed, a muscle in his jaw ticked. The only sign of the volcano erupting beneath his skin. "I brought a gift," Anthony signaled with 2 fingers. From the darkness behind him, 2 of his enforcers dragged a man into the light. They didn't walk him. They hauled him by his armpits, his feet dragging uselessly on the concrete. They threw him to the floor at Patrick's feet. It was Thomas Evans. My father looked like he had been through a blender. His lip was split, his eye swollen shut, and he was sobbing. Incoherent pleas for mercy bubbling from his lips. He was clutching a duffel bag, the bag containing the money and bus ticket Patrick had promised him. "He was trying to catch a cab on 4th Avenue, Anthony said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He seemed in a rush. I thought he should stay for the party." Patrick looked down at Thomas, then back at Anthony. "You caught him. Congratulations. He's garbage anyway. I was done with him. He sold you something that didn't belong to him," Anthony said. He took a step forward. The O'Sullivan guards tensed, fingers twitching on triggers. He sold you my wife. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute, detonating somewhere deep in my chest. Wife. Not collateral, not asset, not debt. Maybe a weaponized word in front of these men, but it wrapped itself around my throat all the same. Patrick laughed. A harsh barking sound. Wife? She's payment, Anthony. She's a debt settlement. Don't try to romanticize it. You bought a whore, and I stole her. She's not payment, Anthony said. His voice dropped, becoming a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. She is the only thing in this city worth more than my empire, and you made the mistake of touching her. I have 6 guns on you. Patrick snarled, losing his patience. And I have a gun on her head. He moved fast, pressing the barrel of his pistol against my temple. The metal was cold. I stopped breathing. One move, Anthony, and I paint the wall with her brains. Drop to your knees. Anthony didn't move. He didn't drop. He stared at Patrick with a look of supreme boredom. You won't shoot her, Anthony said, because if you do, you lose the encryption keys. You lose the leverage. And my sniper, who is currently aiming at your medulla oblongata from the catwalk, will turn your head into a canoe. Patrick froze. His eyes darted up to the dark rafters. You're bluffing, Patrick whispered. Am I? Anthony tilted his head. Lucia, tell him. Do I bluff? I looked at Anthony. I saw the slight shift in his stance, the way his weight was balanced on the balls of his feet. He was coiled energy, waiting for a trigger. He doesn't bluff, I said clearly. He calculates. Drop the gun, Patrick, Anthony commanded. And I might let you leave here with your life. I'll keep the warehouse, of course. Consider it a penalty for the inconvenience. Patrick's face twisted in rage. He was trapped. He knew it. If he shot me, he died. If he surrendered, he lost face. He was a cornered rat, and rats bite. Screw you, Patrick screamed. Kill him. Kill them all. He didn't shoot me. He swung the gun toward Anthony. Time seemed to fracture. In the split second before Patrick pulled the trigger, Anthony moved. He didn't dive for cover. He dove forward. At the same time, I threw my weight violently to the right. The chair tipped over, crashing onto the concrete just as a bullet whizzed through the space where my head had been a second ago. Chaos erupted. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the enclosed space. Crack, crack, crack. I hit the floor hard, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. I couldn't see much from my angle, just flashes of muzzle fire and boots scrambling. Secure the girl, I heard Anthony roar. I struggled against the zip ties, twisting my wrists until the skin broke. The plastic bit deep, but the adrenaline numbed the pain. A pair of boots landed next to my face. It was one of the O'Sullivan guards. He reached down, grabbing my arm to haul me up, using me as a human shield. Get up, bitch! I didn't get up. I coiled my legs and kicked out with everything I had. The heel of my heavy boot connected solidly with his kneecap. There was a sickening crunch. The guard screamed, his leg buckling backward. He fell, dropping his gun. The gun slid across the concrete, stopping inches from my face. I couldn't use my hands, but I wasn't helpless. I rolled onto my back, maneuvering my bound hands under my hips, then my legs, pulling my body through the circle of my arms like a contortionist, until my hands were in front of me. It dislocated my thumb, a sharp, blinding pop of pain. But my hands were forward. I grabbed the gun. The guard was trying to stand on his broken leg, reaching for his knife. I didn't hesitate. I pointed the gun and squeezed the trigger. The recoil jarred my injured thumb, but the guard dropped, a hole in his shoulder. I scrambled to my knees, scanning the room. Anthony was a blur of violence. He had disarmed Patrick and was engaged in hand-to-hand combat with 2 other guards. He moved with a brutal efficiency, using their own momentum against them. He broke an arm, shattered a jaw, and used one man as a shield against the other. But there were too many of them. Another guard appeared on the catwalk, aiming a rifle down at Anthony's exposed back. "Anthony! Above you!" I screamed. Anthony didn't look up. He rolled, grabbing a discarded pistol from the floor and firing blindly over his shoulder. The guard on the catwalk tumbled over the railing, crashing into a stack of pallets. But in the distraction, Patrick had recovered his weapon. He was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose, aiming at me. "You die first," Patrick yelled. I tried to bring my gun up, but my dislocated thumb made my grip weak. I wasn't going to be fast enough. A shadow moved in front of me. Anthony. He stepped into the line of fire just as Patrick pulled the trigger. The impact was audible, a wet, heavy thud. Anthony jerked back, his body shielding mine completely. "No!" I screamed. Anthony didn't fall. He didn't even stumble. He raised his own gun, his face a mask of cold fury, and fired once. Patrick O'Sullivan's head snapped back. He collapsed instantly, the threat extinguished. Silence slammed back into the room, ringing in my ears louder than the gunshots. Anthony stood there for a second, swaying slightly. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across the white shirt, just below his left shoulder. "Anthony!" I gasped, scrambling to my feet. I dropped the gun and reached for him. He turned to me. His face was pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead. But his eyes were clear. He looked at me, scanning for injuries again. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was rough, strained. "Am I hurt?" I choked out a hysterical laugh. "You've been shot. Through and through." He dismissed, though he flinched when he moved his arm. "Missed the bone. I've had worse shaving." He looked around the room. The O'Sullivan guards were either dead or incapacitated. His own men were securing the perimeter, moving with professional silence. Then, Anthony's gaze landed on the far corner. Thomas Evans was huddled behind a crate, clutching his bag of money, shaking like a leaf. He had watched the whole thing, cowering while his daughter fought for her life. Anthony walked over to him. He moved slower now, the adrenaline fading, pain setting in. I followed him, my hands still bound in front of me with the zip ties. Thomas looked up. "Mr. Ravellini, I didn't know they would..." Anthony kicked the bag of money out of Thomas's hands. It slid across the floor, spilling bundles of cash into a puddle of oil. "Get up," Anthony ordered. Thomas scrambled to his feet, pressing his back against the wall. "Please, I helped you. I led you here. You led her here," Anthony corrected. He grabbed Thomas by the collar of his cheap jacket and slammed him against the corrugated steel wall. The sound boomed through the warehouse. "You used her loyalty against her. You traded her life for a bus ticket. I'm her father," Thomas wailed. "You are a donor," Anthony spat. "A biological accident." Anthony pulled a knife from his belt. Thomas shrieked, closing his eyes, but Anthony didn't stab him. He reached out and slashed the zip ties on my wrists. My hands fell free, throbbing. "Lucia," Anthony said, not looking away from my father. "This is your debt to clear. Tell me what to do." I looked at Thomas. I looked at the man who had raised me, who had gambled away my childhood, and who had finally tried to sell my future. I looked at the fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of pain. I felt nothing. The anger had burned out, leaving only cold ash. "Don't kill him," I said quietly. Thomas let out a sob of relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Lucia. I knew you loved me. I'm not doing it for you." I cut him off. I stepped closer, cradling my injured hand. "I'm doing it for him." I nodded at Anthony. "I don't want your blood on his conscience. You aren't worth the stain on his soul." I looked at Anthony. "Exile him." Anthony nodded slowly. "Where?" "Nowhere nice," I said. "Alaska. Or maybe a rig in the North Sea. Somewhere cold, somewhere hard, somewhere without a casino." Anthony leaned in close to Thomas. "You heard her. You have 1 hour to leave the state. My men will escort you to the airport. You get a one-way ticket to Nome. If you ever set foot in New York again, if you ever call her, if you ever speak her name." Anthony pressed the knife blade against Thomas's cheek, drawing a single drop of blood. "I will peel you apart slowly." He let go. Thomas slid down the wall, weeping. He didn't look at me. He looked at the spilled money on the floor, mourning the loss of his payout. "Get him out of my sight," Anthony ordered his men. 2 guards grabbed Thomas and dragged him away. He didn't fight. He just hung limp, a broken man who had finally run out of luck. I watched him go. I didn't feel sad. I felt lighter. The anchor was finally cut. "Lucia." I turned. Anthony was leaning heavily against a crate now, his hand pressed over the wound on his shoulder. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and alarming. "We need to get you to a doctor," I said, panic rising again. "The car," he grunted. "Medical kit. In the back." I grabbed his good arm, wrapping it around my shoulders to support him. He was heavy, dead weight, but I found strength I didn't know I had. We walked out of the warehouse, leaving the carnage behind us. The night air outside was crisp and clean. The rain had stopped. The black SUV was waiting, engine idling. I helped him into the back seat and climbed in after him. "Drive!" I yelled at the driver. "Fast!" The car peeled out of the lot. I immediately went for the medical kit under the seat. I popped the latches and pulled out gauze and pressure bandages. "This is going to hurt," I warned him, my hands shaking as I cut open his shirt. The wound was ugly, a ragged hole in the muscle, but the bleeding was steady, not spurting. No artery. "Do it," Anthony gritted out through clenched teeth. I pressed the gauze pad onto the wound. He groaned, his head falling back against the leather seat, his eyes squeezing shut. I applied pressure, leaning my weight onto his shoulder. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears finally stinging my eyes. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come." I walked right into it. Anthony opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but they locked onto mine with that familiar intensity. He reached up with his bloody hand and cupped the back of my neck, pulling me down until our foreheads touched. "You came," he rasped. "You came for me. I thought you were in trouble." "You were wrong," he said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But you were brave. Stupid. Reckless. But brave." "I kicked a guy," I sniffled, a laugh bubbling up through the tears. "I saw," he murmured. "Excellent form." He shifted his grip, his fingers tangling in my hair. The smell of copper and gunpowder filled the small space between us. "You took a bullet for me," I said. "I told you," he whispered, his gaze dropping to my mouth. "I protect what is mine." "Is that what I am?" I asked. "Yours, Lucia," he breathed. "You have been mine since the moment you looked me in the eye in that living room and didn't blink. I just needed you to realize it." He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled my head down and crushed his lips against mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of blood and fear and survival. It was the kiss of two people who had looked death in the face and spat in its eye. I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring all my relief, all my anger, all my love into it. My hands were covered in his blood. His hand was tangling in my hair. The pain in my thumb, the ache in my shoulder. It all faded into the background. All that mattered was the heat of his mouth and the beat of his heart against my chest. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, he didn't let me go. He kept his forehead pressed to mine. "You're not leaving," he stated. It wasn't a question. "No," I whispered. "I'm not leaving." "Good." He closed his eyes, his breathing evening out as the adrenaline crash hit him. "Because I'm not letting you go. Not after tonight. Not ever." I looked down at his sleeping face, at the harsh lines softened by exhaustion. I pressed the bandage tighter against his shoulder. We were bloodied. We were battered. My father was gone, exiled to the ice. The O'Sullivans were broken. The war was over. But looking at Anthony Ravellini, I knew the reign was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't just a spectator. I was sitting on the throne right beside him. "Drive," I whispered to the driver, my voice steel. "Take us home." The elevator doors slid open, revealing the penthouse not as a fortress, but as a sanctuary. The silence that greeted us was profound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of gunfire and screaming metal we had left behind at the warehouse. I helped Anthony into the living room. He was heavy against me, his adrenaline fading, leaving behind the raw, grinding reality of a bullet wound. His face was pale, a sheen of sweat clinging to his forehead. But he didn't complain. He didn't groan. He just moved with a grim determination. one foot in front of the other. "The sofa," I commanded, guiding him toward the long leather couch. "I need the light." He sat down heavily, his good hand immediately going to his shoulder. The makeshift bandage I had applied in the car was soaked through, dark crimson staining the white linen of his shirt. "I need whiskey," he rasped, leaning his head back. "And the medical kit is in the bathroom cabinet. Bottom shelf. I know where it is." I ran to the bathroom. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to steady. I washed the blood, his blood, the guard's blood, off my skin with scalding water. I grabbed the kit, a bottle of antiseptic, and clean towels. When I returned to the living room, Anthony had already poured himself a glass of amber liquid from the decanter on the side table. He downed it in one swallow, the muscles of his throat working. "Take off the shirt," I said, setting the supplies on the coffee table. He fumbled with the buttons, his fingers clumsy from pain. I batted his hands away gently. "Let me." I knelt between his legs. I unbuttoned the ruined shirt, peeling the fabric away from his skin. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear where the bullet had passed through the deltoid muscle. It was bleeding sluggishly now, but it was deep. "It needs stitches," I said, examining it with the same clinical eye I used to assess a damaged canvas. "The edges are too far apart for butterfly strips." "Do it," Anthony said. He watched me, his dark eyes unfocused but intense. "You have the hands for it. Steady. I restore paintings, Anthony. Canvas doesn't bleed. Flesh is just a different medium," he muttered, closing his eyes. I threaded the needle. I cleaned the wound with alcohol. He hissed through his teeth, his body seizing up for a second before forcibly relaxing. I worked quickly. I didn't apologize for the pain. Apologies wouldn't close the hole. I focused on the task, treating his skin with reverence. Stitch, pull, knot. Stitch, pull, knot. The silence in the room was intimate, broken only by the sound of his breathing and the soft click of the scissors. When I tied the final knot and taped a sterile bandage over the area, I sat back on my heels, exhausted. "It's done," I whispered. Anthony opened his eyes. He looked at the bandage, then at me. He reached out with his good arm, his hand cupping my cheek. His thumb brushed over my lower lip, tracing the shape of it. "You saved me tonight," he said. His voice was low, stripped of all the bravado, all the power dynamics. "Not in the warehouse. Here. Now. You saved me first," I replied, leaning into his touch. "You stepped in front of a bullet. I would step in front of a train for you," he said simply. The air between us shifted. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something heavier, hotter. The adrenaline that had kept us moving was transforming into a different kind of hunger. We had survived. We were alive. And the need to reaffirm that life, to feel it in every nerve ending, was overwhelming. "Lucia," he breathed, his gaze dropping to my lips. "Come here." I didn't hesitate. I stood up and straddled his lap, mindful of his injured shoulder. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in the curve of his throat. He smelled of whiskey, copper, and sandalwood. He smelled like home. "I thought I lost you," I confessed against his skin. "When Patrick had the gun." "You will never lose me," Anthony swore, his hand tangled in my hair, pulling my head back so he could look at me. "I am a difficult man to kill, especially now that I have something to live for." He kissed me. This wasn't like the kiss in the car. That was desperate. This was deliberate. It was a claiming. It was a slow, burning fuse that ignited everything it touched. His lips were demanding, moving against mine with a possessive rhythm that made my toes curl. I opened to him, tasting the whiskey on his tongue, meeting his fire with my own. His hand slid down my back, finding the hem of my sweater. His touch was electric, searing through the cashmere. I helped him, pulling the sweater over my head, discarding it on the floor next to his bloody shirt. Skin on skin. The friction was intoxicating. I traced the muscles of his chest, avoiding the bandage, feeling the heavy thud of his heart beneath my palm. It was beating for me. "The contract," he murmured, breaking the kiss to look into my eyes. It's void. I know, I whispered. I'm not here because of a debt. Say it, he commanded. Tell me why you are here. Because I want you, I said, my voice trembling with the truth of it. Because I choose this. I choose you. He groaned, a sound torn from his chest, and pulled me closer. There were no more words. There was only the heat of the penthouse, the city lights watching from a distance, and the two of us, finally breaking down the last walls between us. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't payment. It was a collision of two souls who had been forged in the fire and found they were made of the same steel. We moved together with a desperate, beautiful rhythm, erasing the violence of the night with the tenderness of the morning. I fell asleep in his arms, his good arm draped over me like a shield, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the only lullaby I needed. The morning sun didn't feel intrusive. It felt victorious. I woke up alone in the bed. For a moment, panic flared. Old habits die hard. But then I saw the note on the pillow. Meeting with the capos. 9 a.m., wear armor. I smiled. He hadn't left me behind. He was inviting me to the war room. I got up, my body aching in a pleasant, lingering way. I showered, scrubbing away the last remnants of the warehouse. I stood before the wardrobe, looking at the rows of clothes Anthony had bought for me. Wear armor. I pushed aside the dresses. Today wasn't a day for silk and flow. Today was a day for structure. I chose a pair of high-waisted black trousers, tailored to perfection. I paired them with a crisp white silk button-down shirt, tucking it in sharply. I added a black blazer with sharp shoulders, power dressing at its finest. No jewelry except the diamond earrings. Hair pulled back in a severe, sleek ponytail. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a mistress. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a Ravellini. I walked out of the room and headed toward the office. I could hear voices drifting down the hallway. Low, rumbling, masculine voices. Tension hung in the air like cigar smoke. The double doors to the office were closed. 2 guards stood outside. They saw me coming. They saw the way I walked, chin up, eyes forward. They didn't ask for ID. They stepped aside and opened the doors. I walked in. The room went silent. Around the long mahogany table sat the inner circle of the Ravellini crime family. 8 men. Hard men. Men with scars and expensive suits and outdated ideas about women. Anthony sat at the head of the table. His left arm was in a sling, hidden beneath his suit jacket, draped over his shoulder. He looked pale, but his eyes were alert, dangerous. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked proud. "Gentlemen?" Anthony said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You all know Lucia. We know who she is. One of the capos, a man named Russo, no relation to the other family, grunted. He didn't look at me. He looked at Anthony. We heard what happened last night. We heard you took a bullet. For a girl. The disrespect was subtle, but it was there. The implication was clear. You are weak. You let a woman compromise you. I took a bullet eliminating the head of the O'Sullivan family. Anthony corrected coldly. Patrick is dead. The O'Sullivan leadership is decapitated. Lucia moved because she believed there was a sniper waiting to put a hole in my skull the second I stepped out of the car. She acted to keep the man who runs this family alive. That sounds like a victory to me, Russo. It's a mess, another capo argued. The streets are going to be chaos. The O'Sullivan fronts, their money, it's all going to go underground. We missed the chance to seize their assets because we were too busy playing hero. This was my cue. I didn't ask for permission to speak. I walked to the head of the table, standing to Anthony's right. I placed a folder I had compiled from my mental notes onto the mahogany surface. You're wrong, I said. Every head snapped toward me. The audacity of a woman speaking in this room was unheard of. Excuse me? Russo scoffed. Anthony, get your pet under control. Anthony didn't move. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing to me. The floor is yours, Lucia. I turned my gaze on Russo. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, using the same cold calculation I used to spot a fake signature. You think the O'Sullivan money is gone because you're looking for cash, I said, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. You're looking for duffel bags and safes. But the O'Sullivans didn't keep their wealth in cash. They kept it in assets. Shell companies. Art. Real estate. I opened the folder. It was empty of paper. But I didn't need notes. I had a photographic memory for value. Last night, I continued, pacing slowly down the length of the table. While I was in their warehouse, I saw their shipping manifests. I saw their inventory. So? Russo challenged. Junk. Not junk, I corrected. Leverage. The O'Sullivans were laundering money through a gallery in Chelsea, the Gilded Frame. They were buying high-end antiques at inflated prices to clean their drug money. I know this because I saw a shipment of 18th century French furniture sitting in that warehouse. That shipment alone is worth $3 million on the legitimate market. The room went quiet. $3 million got their attention. But more importantly, I said, turning back to face them, I know where the paper trail leads. Patrick O'Sullivan was sloppy. He was buying fakes to cut costs, thinking no one would notice. If we seize those assets, we don't just get the furniture. We get the proof of tax fraud for every shell company attached to those purchases. We can use that leverage to blackmail their remaining lieutenants into flipping to our side. I stopped at the foot of the table. You're worried about chaos in the streets? There won't be chaos. Because by noon today, we will own their supply chain, their laundering fronts, and their loyalty. We don't need to shoot our way into their territory. We just need to buy the mortgage on their house and evict them. I looked around the table. I can identify every fake asset they hold. I can tell you which accounts are vulnerable. I can double the family's liquid capital in 3 months without firing a single bullet. I placed my hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. Anthony didn't take a bullet for a girl, I said, my voice hard as diamond. He took a bullet to secure the greatest asset this family has ever acquired. Me. Silence stretched for 10 seconds. It was heavy, thick with calculation. Russo looked at me. He looked at the folder. Then he looked at Anthony. Is she serious? Russo asked. She spotted a fake Renoir from across the room that cost me $2 million. Anthony said, a smirk playing on his lips. She's deadly serious. Russo looked back at me. The sneer was gone, replaced by a grudging, greedy respect. $3 million in furniture? He asked. Conservative estimate, I replied. If we auction it in London, maybe 4. Russo nodded slowly. He tapped his knuckles on the table. All right, Russo said. I'm listening. One by one, the other capos nodded. The tension in the room broke. They weren't looking at me like a mistress anymore. They were looking at me like a money printer. I walked back to Anthony's side. I didn't sit down. I stood next to his chair, my hand resting lightly on the back of it, just inches from his shoulder. Any objections? Anthony asked, his voice final. No, boss. The table murmured in unison. Good, Anthony said. Then get to work. Lucia will provide the list of targets. You seize them. Dismissed. The men stood up, gathering their things, filing out of the room with a new energy. They had a plan. They had a future. When the last door closed, Anthony let out a long breath. He slumped slightly, the pain in his shoulder clearly taking its toll now that the performance was over. I turned to him immediately, crouching down by his chair. You should be resting, I scolded gently. I'm fine, he said, reaching out to take my hand. He brought it to his lips, kissing the knuckles. You were magnificent. I was terrified, I admitted. You didn't show it. You walked in here and owned the room. You owned them. I just spoke their language, I said. Greed, Anthony chuckled, then winced. Greed is useful, but loyalty is rare. He looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine. They accepted you, he said. Do you realize what that means? You aren't just on the periphery anymore. You are in the center. There is no going back to a normal life after this. You are a Ravellini now, in blood and in business. I know, I said. I thought about the antique shop, about the quiet life of poverty I had left behind. It felt like a dream from another lifetime. I looked at the man in front of me, wounded, dangerous, and looking at me with a love that terrified me in its intensity. I don't want a normal life, Anthony. I want this. I want us. Good, he whispered. Because I intend to keep you for a very long time." He pulled me up, guiding me to sit on his lap, careful of his sling. I rested my head on his good shoulder, looking out the massive glass window at the city below. The O'Sullivans were gone. My father was exiled. The capos were in line. We had won. But as I watched the clouds drift over the skyline, I knew the game never truly ended. There would always be new enemies, new debts, new threats. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. Let them come. Let them try. They would find us ready. The king and his queen, sitting in their high tower, watching the world burn and rebuilding it in our own image. "Lucia?" Anthony murmured against my hair. "Yes, that furniture. Is it really worth $3 million?" I smiled against his neck. "Probably closer to 5, I whispered. "But I like to under-promise and over-deliver." Anthony laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the empty room. "That's my girl. 6 months. 182 days. That was how long it had been since the night at the warehouse. Since the night the O'Sullivan empire crumbled and mine began. I stood in the center of the Ravellini Gallery's main showroom, surrounded by the quiet hum of extreme wealth. The space was cavernous, with polished concrete floors and stark white walls that made the art pop with almost violent intensity. Tonight was the opening of our Renaissance of Shadows exhibition, a curated collection of recovered 17th century Italian masterworks. Officially, I was the curator and director. Unofficially, I was the woman who had turned the Ravellini family's dirty money into a cultural institution so pristine that even the mayor was attending tonight. "Director Evans?" I turned. A young assistant, fresh out of Columbia and terrified of her own shadow, was holding a clipboard. "It's just Lucia, Sarah," I corrected gently, though I kept my posture rigid. "What is it?" The bidder for the Caravaggio. He's asking about the provenance documents. He says there's a gap in the ownership history between 1942 and 1946. I smiled. It was a practiced, shark-like smile I had learned from Anthony. "Tell Mr. Henderson that the gap exists because the painting was hidden in a monastery in Tuscany to protect it from the fascists." I lied smoothly. "And tell him if he asks again, the price goes up another 10% for historical research fees." Sarah's eyes widened. "Can we do that?" "We can do whatever we want, Sarah. We own the painting. We own the building. We practically own the block." She nodded frantically and scurried away. I took a sip of my sparkling water. The imposter syndrome that used to plague me, the voice that whispered, "You are just a fraud, you are just a girl with a debt," was silent. It had been silenced by 6 months of hard wins. I hadn't just decorated Anthony's life. I had optimized it. The O'Sullivan assets we seized were now legitimate revenue streams. The furniture I had identified in the warehouse sold for $4.2 million in London. The shell companies were dismantled and restructured. I wasn't just safe. I was essential. "You look dangerous when you're thinking about money." The voice came from behind me, low and intimate, sending a familiar shiver down my spine. I didn't turn immediately. I let the presence of him wash over me. Anthony Ravellini, my partner, my lover, the man who had reshaped my reality. "I'm always thinking about money," I said, turning slowly. "It's part of the job description." Anthony was standing there, looking devastating in a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like a second skin. His arm, fully healed now, though a jagged scar remained as a souvenir of our war, was resting casually in his pocket. His dark eyes were fixed on me with a look that made the crowded room disappear. "You outdid yourself," he said, gesturing to the gallery. "The mayor is currently telling the police commissioner that you are a visionary. The mayor is drunk on the Prosecco," I replied dryly, "and the commissioner knows exactly who runs this city, regardless of what art is on the walls." Anthony stepped closer, invading my personal space in that way he did, claiming me without touching me. "They fear you, Lucia. I saw the way Henderson looked at you. He was terrified to negotiate." "Good," I said. "Fear pays better than respect. Is that something I taught you?" "I'm a quick study." He chuckled, a rich sound that vibrated in his chest. He reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of my dress. Tonight, I wore silver, a metallic, fluid silk that looked like poured mercury. It was cold, sharp, and undeniable. "Have you heard from the north?" I asked quietly, the code we used for my father. Anthony's expression hardened instantly. The playfulness vanished. "The report came in this morning," he said. "He's in Nome. He's working on a crab boat. It's brutal work, cold, dangerous. Is he gambling? There are no casinos on a fishing trawler, Lucia, and the local bars know that if he places a bet, his kneecaps belong to me. He is miserable, he is cold, but he is alive." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. I didn't wish him death. I just wished him irrelevance. And in the frozen dark of Alaska, Thomas Evans was finally irrelevant. "Does it bother you?" Anthony asked, watching my face closely. "No," I said honestly. "It feels like a story I read a long time ago. He's a ghost. Good, because I don't want ghosts at our celebration." He checked his watch, the same Patek Philippe from the night he bought me. "Wrap it up," he ordered softly. "We're leaving." "The auction hasn't even started," I protested. "I have to close the Caravaggio. Sarah can close the Caravaggio. If she messes it up, we fire her." "But I need you." "Need me for what?" "For a private meeting," he said. "Penthouse." 20 minutes. He didn't wait for an argument. He turned and walked away, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. I watched him go, feeling that familiar pull in my chest. After 6 months, the intensity hadn't faded. If anything, it had crystallized into something harder, brighter. I found Sarah, gave her a terrifying pep talk about the Caravaggio, and followed him out. The ride to the penthouse was silent, but it wasn't the heavy silence of our first car ride together. It was a comfortable silence, filled with the warmth of his hand resting on my knee and the hum of the city we now ruled together. When we arrived, the apartment was dim, lit only by the city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was spectacular, a grid of gold and white stretching out to the horizon. Anthony walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of red wine, a 96 Barolo, real this time. He handed me a glass and walked to the window, staring out at his kingdom. "Do you remember the night you arrived?" he asked, his back to me. "Vividly," I said, walking over to join him. "I remember the contract, the rules, the lock on my door, the lock you never used," he noted. "I didn't need to." He turned to face me. He took a sip of wine, his eyes serious. 5 years, he said. "That was the deal. 5 years of service in exchange for your father's debt." "I remember." "We are 6 months in," he said. "You have paid that debt 10 times over, Lucia." The O'Sullivan acquisition alone covered the $400,000. The gallery profits cover the interest. Technically, legally, the ledger is balanced. My heart skipped a beat. A cold feeling washed over me. Was this a breakup? Was he firing me? "Are you saying my time is up?" I asked carefully. "Are you evicting me?" Anthony reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was heavy, cream-colored stationery. I recognized the letterhead. It was the contract. The original document he had made me sign in the car that first night. He held it up. "Article 4, Section 2, he recited from memory. "Upon satisfaction of the debt, the collateral, Lucia Evans, shall be released from all obligations and provided with a severance package sufficient for relocation." He looked at me. "You are free, Lucia." I stared at the paper. 6 months ago, that paper had been a chain. Now, looking at it, I felt a surge of panic. Freedom? Freedom meant leaving. Freedom meant a life without the adrenaline, without the power, without him. "I don't want a severance package," I said, my voice tight. "It's substantial," Anthony continued, ignoring me. $5 million, a clean identity, an apartment in Paris or London or Rome. You could appraise art for the Louvre. You could live a life where no one carries a gun and no one bleeds on your carpet. He held the paper over the flame of a candle burning on the side table. "Anthony, don't!" I stepped forward. The corner of the paper caught fire. The orange flame curled the edge, turning the legal jargon into ash. "It's done," he said. He dropped the burning contract into a metal ashtray. We watched it burn. The words, collateral and owner, disappeared in smoke. "The debt is paid," Anthony said, his voice rough. "Your father is gone. The contract is ash. You are not a prisoner. You are not an employee. You are standing in this room because you walked in, but you can walk out." He stepped closer, his body heat radiating toward me. "So I am asking you, Lucia. Not telling you. Asking you." He looked vulnerable. For the first time since I had known him, the Mafia boss looked terrified. "Go to Paris," he whispered. "Be safe. Be normal. Find a man who doesn't have a target on his back." I looked at the ash in the tray. Then I looked at him. I set my wineglass down on the table with a sharp clink. "You're an idiot," I said. Anthony blinked, startled. "Excuse me? You're a brilliant strategist, a ruthless leader, and a terrible judge of character if you think I want Paris," I said, stepping into his space, poking him in the chest with my index finger. "Normal? You think I want normal? I spent 23 years being normal, Anthony. I was poor, I was scared, and I was invisible. Normal is just a nice word for powerless." I grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. "I don't want safe. I want the man who broke a capo's wrist because he insulted me. I want the man who took a bullet for me. I want the man who lets me run a multi-million-dollar empire because he knows I'm smarter than his entire board of directors." "Lucia..." "Shut up. I'm negotiating." I looked around the room. I grabbed a cocktail napkin from the bar. I pulled a pen from his inside pocket. I slammed the napkin onto the marble counter and wrote quickly. My handwriting was jagged, furious. Clause 1, partnership. Clause 2, exclusivity, business in bed. Clause 3, till death do us part. I turned around and slapped the napkin onto his chest. "Here," I said. "New terms." Anthony took the napkin. He read it. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face, chasing away the shadow of fear. "Clause 3 is legally binding in most states," he murmured. "It usually requires a license." "We own the mayor," I reminded him. "We can get a license at 3 a.m. if we want." He looked up at me. The love in his eyes was so fierce it almost knocked the wind out of me. "You really want this?" he asked. "This isn't a fairy tale, Lucia. It's blood and threats and looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life." "I know," I said. "But I also know that when I look over my shoulder, you'll be there. And when you look over yours, I'll be there." I took his hand, the one with the watch, the one that had guided me out of poverty and into power. "I'm not the girl in the corner anymore, Anthony. I'm the woman standing next to you. Deal with it." Anthony laughed. He tossed the napkin onto the table and pulled me into his arms, lifting me off the ground. "Deal," he growled. He kissed me. It was a kiss of relief, of promise, of absolute finality. It sealed the new contract better than any notary could. "So," he said, setting me down but keeping his arms locked around my waist. "No Paris? Maybe for a weekend," I conceded. "We can go buy some more fake art." "I love you," he said. The words were simple, stark, and heavy. "I love you," I replied. "Now, are you going to keep talking, or are you going to show me why I signed that exclusivity clause?" Anthony's grin turned predatory. "Bedroom. Now." "Yes, boss." We walked toward the hallway, hand in hand. I glanced back one last time at the window. The city was still there, glowing and dangerous. Somewhere out there, new enemies were probably plotting. Somewhere, the ghost of my father was freezing. Somewhere the world was spinning on its axis of cruelty and chaos. But inside these walls, in the fortress we had built, there was order. There was loyalty. My father had cried that he had no money. He had pointed at me and said I would serve as payment. He was right, in a way. I was the payment. I was the price Anthony Ravellini paid to find his soul. And he was the reward I earned for surviving. The debt was settled. The books were closed. And as Anthony kicked the bedroom door shut behind us, locking the world out, I knew that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was winning. and the game was just getting started.